Okay. Hello. I'd like to welcome our international, intercontinental, interreligious audience today from Germany, Argentina, and interstate, New Jersey and Massachusetts, to a wonderful program, which is about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, his relevance of his thought in the 21st century. For those of you who have heard Rabbi Ernesto Yattah and Dr. Rudnick lead any of our programs, of which we've had a number of them, you know that we're in for a special time because they are erudite and approachable. Rabbi Ernesto Yattah is the dean of the Abraham Joshua Heschel Rabbinical School at the Seminario Rabbinico Latin America and Buenos Aires. He was ordained as a rabbi at JTS in New York. Those who've attended past programs are well aware of his talents. He is internationally recognized as an expert on Heschel. Dr. Rudnick, with scholarly excellence and a warm heart, has been a partner in creating programs to increase knowledge and our connection to each other. She is a Lutheran theologian who earned her MA in Protestant theology at the universities Tübingen and Göttingen. She received a second MA and PhD from JTS in New York. Her ordination is as a Lutheran minister from the Evangelical Church of Hanover. She's taught nationally and internationally. She's a professor at the Institute of Theology and Comparative Religion and a consultant to Jewish-Christian relations of the Evangelical Church of Hanover. These are our partners. She's worked in Jewish-Christian relations for many years and has published extensively in the field. We're lucky to have her providing excellent programming for us. We have a surprise moderator today. It's our own Debbie Miller, who describes herself in writing as deliriously happy to be a member of Congregation Agudath Israel in Caldwell, New Jersey. She's active on our Interfaith Committee, where she first got to meet Dr. Rudnick 3 years ago. Additionally, she's a synagogue leader, an educator, and a volunteer in numerous capacities in the synagogue and other organizations. She too earned an MA and EDD at the Davidson Graduate School of Jewish Education. As an educator, she was Associate Director of Melton Research Center for Jewish Education, head of the Solomon Schechter Day School in Raritan Valley, and has published 5 Judaica-oriented children's books. I could probably do 3 pages on each person that I've introduced, but we do want to get on and learn about Heschel. So Ursula, up to you now.
Dear Gail, thank you very much. A warm welcome to everyone in the room, to our friends in the United States, New Jersey, Massachusetts, to Gail, to Debbie, and everyone else I've been seeing. And of course, to our speaker of today, Rabbi Ernesto Yattah. We met at JTS a number of decades ago. We became friends and have stayed friends ever since then. It's a special honor that you, dear Ernesto, will be talking today. A very warm welcome to you. And of course, herzlich willkommen an alle Freunde in Deutschland. A warm welcome to everyone who is in Germany. For our American friends who do not know our organization called Begegnung Christen und Juden Niedersachsen, I'll say a few words about that. Begegnung Christen und Juden Niedersachsen, Encounters of Christians and Jews Lower Saxony, is a non-profit organization which is active in the field of Jewish-Christian relations. The motto is our program, namely Encounters, in Lower Saxony, but also far beyond. We plan and organize lectures, workshops, offer courses and seminars on multiple themes and topics associated with Jewish and Christian traditions and our respective relations. We organize study tours, so we just went on a study tour to Romania, and we support volunteer work, and each year we honor a person who has made an important contribution to Jewish-Christian relations in Germany, Lower Saxony. And now I'll hand it over to Diane Reidenberg, who will say greetings in German, and after that to Marilyn Lebens, who will say some greetings in Spanish. Dear Diane, please, it's your turn.
Vielen Dank, Dr. Rudnick. Guten Tag und willkommen. Grüße an alle, die heute Nachmittag per Zoom zu uns kommen, aus Europa, Süd- und Nordamerika, insbesondere Hannover, Deutschland, Buenos Aires, Argentinien und Caldwell, New Jersey. Wir haben erneut das Privileg, eine Präsentation unserer beiden besonderen Gastredner, der international renommierten interreligiosen Führer Dr. Ursula Rudnick und Rabbi Ernesto Yattah zu haben. Ihr Thema ist Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, die Relevanz seines Denkens für das 21. Jahrhundert. Rabbi Yattah wurde am Jewish Theological Seminary in New York ordiniert. Ist Dekan der Rabbinischule Abraham Joshua Heschel am Seminario Rabbinico Latinoamericano in Buenos Aires. Dr. Rudnick ist ordinierte Pfarrer und lutherischer Theologie mit internationaler Lehrtätigkeit. Professor am Institut für Theologie und Vergleichende Religionswissenschaft und Referent für jüdische christliche Beziehungen der evangelischen Kirche Hannover, Deutschland. Inhaberin von 2 Masterabschlüssen. Hat sie einen PhD vom Jewish Theological Seminary in New York und hat zahlreiche Publikationen auf diesem Gebiet veröffentlicht. Rabbi Heschel war ein bekannter jüdischer Theologie, Humanist, Autor, Professor und politischer Aktivist. Einer seiner Kernüberzeugungen war, dass die Menschheit geschaffen wurde, um mit Gott zusammenzuarbeiten, um die Welt zu verbessern. Rabbi Heschel war besonders berühmt dafür, dass mit Dr. Martin Luther King im Namen der Bürgerrechte für alle von Selma nach Montgomery, Alabama, marschierte. Ähnlich spielte Rabbi Heschels Buch Gott auf der Suche nach dem Menschen eine wirklich zentrale Rolle in meiner eigenen spirituellen Entwicklung und religiösen Praxis. Vielen Dank ihm voraus, Dr. Rudnick und Rabbi Yattah, dass Sie ihr Einsichten und ihr Verständnis von Dr. Heschel und seinen Einfluss auf das zeitgenössische Denken geteilt haben.
Thank you so much, Diane. Thank you. And now Marilyn Lebens, please.
Buenos días y bienvenidos a todos. Saludamos a todos participando en este Zoom de Europa, Sudamérica y Norteamérica, especialmente a ustedes de Caldwell, New Jersey. Es un gran privilegio otra vez recibir una presentación de la doctora Ursula Rudnick y el rabino Ernesto Yattah. Los dos son guías renombrados internacionalmente por su trabajo en las relaciones entre las religiones. El asunto de hoy es el rabino Abraham Joshua Heschel, la pertinencia de sus ideas en el siglo XXI. El rabino Yattah, ordenado por el Seminario Teológico Judío en Nueva York, es el deán de la Escuela Rabínica Abraham Joshua Heschel del Seminario Rabínico Latinoamericano en Buenos Aires. La doctora Rudnick es ministra ordinaria y una teóloga luterana. Ha enseñado internacionalmente y es profesora del Instituto de Teología y Religiones Comparativas y también una consultante para relaciones judías cristianas de la Iglesia Evangélica de Hannover en Alemania. Cumplió 2 másters y recibió su doctorado del Seminario Teológica Judía en Nueva York y además ha publicado extensivamente. El eminente teólogo judío, el rabino Heschel, era humanitario, autor, profesor y activista político. Uno de los principios centrales es que la humanidad fue creada por Dios como participante con Dios en mejorar el mundo. Personalmente, añade Gail Kleinman, la obra Dios en búsqueda del hombre tuvo una gran parte central en el desarrollo espiritual y costumbres religiosas personales. El rabino Heschel es famoso especialmente por marchar con el Dr. Martin Luther King de Selma a Montgomery, Alabama, por los derechos civiles para todos. Nos los agradecimos, doctora Rudnick y rabino Yattah, por compartir con nosotros su comprensión e interpretación del doctor Heschel y su influencia en el pensamiento contemporáneo.
So before we actually invite Rabbi Yattah to begin his presentation, I've been asked to share one small personal contact that I had with Rabbi Heschel. It's in 2 parts. When I was in 7th grade, living in Denver, Colorado, they started an adult learning opportunity that my parents took part in, where they had what we would now call a Shabbaton, or a retreat, in a beautiful mountain area in Estes Park, Colorado. And they brought as their scholar Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. This is 1957. And he was not extremely well known yet at that time. And I don't know what he did with my parents, but they came back, changed people. Somehow they were flying with the idea of being Jewish. It changed their outlook, their understanding of being Jewish. They went from thinking of Judaism something narrow and confined to something broad and exciting. We skip a number of years, and now I'm going off to be a student in New York. And my mother says to me, you're going to be studying across the street from the Jewish Theological Seminary. You must make an appointment and go see Rabbi Heschel. So I went to the Jewish Theological Seminary on Simchat Torah, and somebody pointed him out to me. And I said, Rabbi Yattah will know, and Ursula will know exactly where I'm talking about. On the stairs going up from the Beit Midrash in those days was on the, you know where it was. It was in the basement, basically. So on the stairs going up, there was this man smoking a cigar. I didn't know you could smoke on Simchat Torah then. What did I know? And that was Rabbi Heschel. And I went over to him and I said, trembling, my mother asked me to give you regards. Her name is Ida Uchel from Denver, Colorado. And he took my hand in both of his hands. And he said, how is your dear mother? And I said, fine. And he said, and what are you doing in New York? And I said, I'm studying at Barnard. And he said, and are you taking courses here at JTS? And I said, no. And he said, come and see me this week. So what was I going to say? No. So I made an appointment and I came to see Rabbi Heschel in his tiny office. Those of you who know JTS, the offices were this big, with books up to there, but almost no room even for a desk. And he said, so you are a student at Barnard? I said, yes. He said, so when you finish, you will have an excellent education in Western civilization. And what will you have in your Jewish education? Are you satisfied going through life knowing what you knew as a high school graduate? And so here I am. Because of Rabbi Heschel, I had to start taking classes at JTS and basically never stopped. So this is my way of saying thank you to Rabbi Heschel, and thank you to Rabbi Yattah for bringing him to life for all of us. And thank you for Ursula for knowing Rabbi Yattah.
Thank you, Debbie.
Nicely done.
And I forgot to say, and now Rabbi Yattah is going to begin his presentation. Here we go.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here for this special encounter, international. We have to be polyglots to understand everything that we are saying in different languages. But maybe that's also a way of honoring who Heschel was. You know, he traversed different latitudes, different longitudes in the world, in his life, from Warsaw through Vilna, through Berlin, Frankfurt, London, and getting to the US. And he became a master, as all of you know, in several different languages. They were all united in his soul, and being a great writer, great poet, he was able to write incredible works in different languages. So maybe that will be the first idea that I would like to share with everybody about Heschel, which is Heschel being a philosopher of religion who founded his conception of religion in a very universal foundation, a humanistic dimension. We can think of Jewish philosophy as having two branches, so to speak. Those who emphasize the Jewish aspects, the unique aspects of Judaism, and those who conceive of Judaism as meaningful only insofar and to the extent that it can become meaningful to all humankind. And in a certain way, it is this second approach that Heschel had to Jewish philosophy and to Jewish thinking and to the Jewish tradition as a whole. That's the message I received when I was a teenager going to my synagogue here in Buenos Aires from my rabbi, Marshall Meyer, who was one of the foremost disciples of Abraham Heschel. He fundamentally addressed our human concerns as human beings, and he made us understand that probing deeply into the Jewish tradition, as Debbie was evoking in a certain way, delving deeply into the Jewish tradition, primarily had a deep impact in the way we could be human. And I would say this first dimension of Heschel's life and thought and his works, his writings, is of the essence to what we want to point out today and we want to share today. So let me give you just a brief outline of his life. And as we go along, we'll try to weave what was significant for Heschel in those places where he lived. As you know, Heschel was born 1907 in Warsaw. In a family, he was the heir to great Hasidic dynasties. And I would say Hasidism was the essence of Heschel's thinking, of Heschel's life, his way of being. He felt that the founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, was a human being who had no precedent in all of Jewish history. He was a miracle that happened in Eastern Europe from a spiritual perspective. He created a new way of spirituality that was the repository of all the history of Judaism, from biblical times through rabbinic times, the Middle Ages, Jewish philosophy from the Middle Ages, and then with all the mystical dimensions of Judaism. They all accumulated, so to speak, in a totally integrated way in the Baal Shem Tov, who gave birth to a movement that was deeply spiritual and was a source of spiritual renewal in Eastern Europe. And that was the context in which Heschel was born. And in a certain way, what Heschel said about the Baal Shem Tov, I could say about Heschel, that he was a miracle. He is not just a thinker. He is not one more Jewish philosopher of the modern times. In my opinion, Heschel was an event, something that has no precedent in all of Jewish history. It's difficult to conceive in our time, but I think that 500 years from today, when Jewish people and when people look at the past of the Jewish tradition, Heschel might become a figure that is an event in Jewish history in the same way that someone like the Baal Shem Tov, but before him, Maimonides was. You know, there is a phrase about Maimonides that sums it all up. It's Mi Moshe ad Moshe lo haya ke Moshe. From Moses to Moses, there was no one like Moses. That was said to show that Maimonides is a miracle, an event in Jewish history, something that is not easily explainable. How one human being could do what Maimonides did in the 12th century with all the works that he wrote. In a certain way, I will sum up what I believe about Heschel with the following phrase. Mi Abraham ad Abraham lo haya ke Abraham. From Abraham, our father, back in the biblical times, to Abraham Joshua Heschel, there has been no one like Abraham Joshua Heschel, because he was able, living in our day and age, to integrate all the best of Judaism, of all of history, beginning with the biblical period, going through the rabbinic times, the Talmud, the Midrash, then Jewish philosophy in the Middle Ages that tried to address the issue of the relation between faith and reason, and the mystical tradition from the Talmudic times through Kabbalah all the way to the Hasidic world. Heschel was the recipient of all of this incredible Jewish tradition. What he did in his life is to integrate it in the right dimensions and proportions. So for me, Heschel is the last great master of Judaism. And this is very important for us to understand. Heschel is a complicated thinker. Reading his works is easy on the one hand because his language is poetic and is beautiful, inspiring. Everybody can read it. You don't have to be knowledgeable in technical terminology to a great degree. However, because his writings are kind of like a spiritual diary that he writes of his own spiritual mystical experiences also, sometimes the main ideas of Heschel are difficult to understand. And we need certain categories of rational thinking to know that there is a skeletal spinal cord of philosophical thinking to Heschel's writings. But fundamentally, what he was able to do is to integrate all the different dimensions of Judaism in a way that would be significant and meaningful to his day and age. So, what is it that Heschel taught us, or why is he so special? In my opinion, I would say that Heschel had two aspects of his being: the spiritual, deep condition of his Hasidic background, a deep spirituality, someone who was unique in his spiritual depth, interior life, his faith on the one hand, and then on the other hand, he was able to manifest this deep spirituality in his action, in his commitments, in his ethical and political life. And these two sides, this polarity of Heschel, is what he has done in a marvelous way, that for us, it becomes a model for what we need to do and what we have to do in our day and age, with the challenges that humankind is facing and that the Jewish people particularly also is facing in our day and age. This is where we call upon Heschel, who lived in the 60s. Primarily, that was the peak of his glory, of when he became so important in the United States and then worldwide. We go back to him as a model for what we have to do today in our day and age. Now, how can we understand this relationship between his time and our time? Because we want to know how Heschel is significant for today, for the postmodern world, for the transmodern world, for the 21st century. And to put it in some concise way, let me share with you this idea. Heschel lived in the modern times, squarely in the modern times. He had a pre-modern tradition that he received it, as I said before, in an integrated way of Jewish history. And he was, on the one hand, someone who broke away from the pre-modern world, from the world of Hasidism, into the modern world when he went from Warsaw to Vilna, and then from Vilna to Berlin to study at the University of Berlin. He became there a Western thinker, embracing modernity, appreciating the blessings that modernity had to give humankind, with the Enlightenment, with emancipation, with rights, with democracy, with all different gifts that modernity brought to us. He didn't want to remain closed in a traditional world. He opened himself to the world at large. And this embracing of modernity allowed him to be an interpreter in modern terms of the traditional teachings of Judaism and of Hasidism. At the same time, when he went from Warsaw to Berlin via Vilna, he suffered a tremendous shock in his life. Of course, as we all know, he saw the rise of Nazism in the 1930s in Germany. And he felt that all his aspirations and expectations of breaking out of the very particularistic parochialism of his origins into the world at large. This was a tragic experience for him because he was first-hand witness of what was happening in Germany in the 1930s. And then afterwards, when he went to London and eventually to the United States. It is this experience of disillusionment with the modern times, with rationality, with rationalism, with science, that showed Heschel that all the greatest values of modernity carried within them a seed of danger if they were not to be integrated with the spiritual teachings that he had received when he was in Warsaw in Poland. So the rest of his life, he dedicated it to translating into modern terminology a traditional religious outlook that would create a context of understanding the limitations of reason and the limitations of science and the limitations of modern ideals to address the human existential problems, both spiritually for every human being, but also collectively in terms of the political realities and the civilization realities that modern human beings found themselves. And this he was able to give best expression when he went to the United States. In a certain way, he came from Europe with a very deep education in every way, and he came to the United States and saw the American culture, which on the one hand, he was very appreciative because of the freedom that it entailed for him personally, living in the United States, and the values of the United States of freedom and democracy. But on the other hand, he experienced the limitations of American culture, the materialism in American culture. And when he experienced the discrimination against African Americans in the 1960s, he, in a certain way, found in the United States problems and challenges that he related to his experience in Germany and in Europe. And that's the context in which he, in a new situation, felt compelled to create something new from the depth of the Jewish tradition that he represented, to challenge the American Jewish community and the larger society of the United States. In a free society, some are guilty, but all are responsible, he said. This is a summation of what he would have liked to have happened in Germany and in Europe and in the world during Second World War. He felt there was a new moment in history in the 60s in the United States, and that there was echoes of what he experienced in Europe. And he saw an opportunity himself not to fall into the grave mistake of the bystanders, of those who remained silent. He felt he had to speak out. And that is the opportunity that life gave him in the United States, in a certain way, to address the mourning that he suffered in his own family because of the Shoah and the horrors of Second World War and the Shoah. It was his way of addressing that suffering and pain that traversed Heschel's heart and all of his family and all the world that he had come from. That is one of the motivations that inspired him to do what he did in the United States, both in terms of the civil rights and his peace activism against the war in Vietnam. Now, that's understanding Heschel from the depths of suffering. But why could he do it? And how could he do it in the unique way that he did it? This, in a certain way, brings us to another aspect of Heschel, the blessings of his upbringing. He was given an appreciation in his Hasidic world of the miracle of the world, the miracle of being alive, the surprise of being alive, the radical amazement, as he called it, in front of the experience of being human and being alive, a witness to the glory of the divine creation. The spirituality of Heschel was a spirituality so profound, where he took nothing for granted, so deep and so marvelous in a certain way, that he was able, with that spirituality, that appreciation for the miracles of the world and the miracle of human existence, he was able, with that spiritual power, to address the greatest tragedies of humankind. He felt that faith in the creator of the universe and a connection to the dimension of holiness is the only way that a human being can indeed address the absurd of our existence and the absurd in international politics. It was the only way to address successfully the catastrophe, okay? But again, he did it because of his deep appreciation of the miracle of being alive. In a certain way, in today's date, where we live today, in the postmodern times, we can find inspiration in Heschel's work, because although he lived in the modern times, in the 20th century, he was fundamentally a critic of modernity. And today, we are experiencing the evidence of the failures of modernity, or even the decadence of modernity. And we all know that we are entering into a new world. We don't know how this world is going to be, but the fundamental challenges that humankind faced in going from pre-modernity to modernity are similar to the challenges that we are facing today. On the one hand, science and technology advancing at rapid pace into artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and other areas that we know are new fields of development in the human civilization. At the same time, we are experiencing the breakdown of many values that modernity established, the value of democracy among them. Today, things that we thought were to be taken for granted as accomplishments of modernity are being called into question. So, in a certain way, today we are exponentially experiencing at the end of modernity similar challenges that humankind faced when moving from the pre-modern times to the modern times. And there are two ways in which modernity expressed itself fundamentally. One, through the Enlightenment and the emphasis on reason. And the second one was a counter movement to the Enlightenment and the rationalist scientific mode of understanding human nature, and that was the romantic existentialist way, which challenged the rationalism of the modern times. Heschel, in my opinion, although he bridges between the two, he emphasizes the importance of reason, of study, of objectivity, of intellectual honesty and integrity. At the same time, he squarely, I would say, would find himself in the Romantic movement that asserted the importance of artistic sensitivities, of being alive to our feelings, which is the source of art, and of spirituality, which was also very important in the Romanticism that began to be developed, say, beginning of the 19th century in Germany. So Heschel is part of a group of human thinkers, philosophers, people who understood the limits of reason as a source of blessings for humankind and understood the dangers of human reason and science and technology for humankind as a whole. He saw in the 1940s, 50s, the rise of nuclear technology, which deeply affected Heschel. Whenever he would talk about the Shoah, next, he would always mention Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He saw the dangers of science and technology. And for that, he appealed to other aspects of our humanity, which have to do with the heart and with the soul, to be able to contain the power that is given to humankind through reason, science, and technology. And I think this is the message that he transmitted, that in the modern times, when humankind felt that through reason, we could address all the problems and the challenges of humankind, and we could dispose with religion as mere superstition, Heschel saw the dangers of this cultural move. And he re-emphasized the importance of reconnecting ourselves with the wisdom of ancient traditions, of the different religious manifestations in the world, that we needed that in order to be able to handle in a good way the knowledge that we were granted. That knowledge of the Garden of Eden, symbolically speaking, that was given to the human being, for Heschel, it took thousands of years for humankind to understand the dangers of eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or the tree of good and evil or bad knowledge, basically. And from his spiritual perspective, he did a critique of rationality as the end goal of human existence. And he provided a path for us to be sensitive to the blessings that the Spirit could bring to the human being. This is, in a certain way, how I conceive of his work in philosophical terms, and of his emphasis, among others, on ethics and on spirituality. Ethics in the work that he did in society, and spirituality in the dedication that he gave to the spiritual act par excellence in Judaism, which is prayer. We lost the art of praying. We lost the capacity to celebrate the miracle of human existence. He felt that without wonder, without radical amazement, there can be no religion. So he rooted his religious teachings in the human experience of being surprised by the blessings of life. This, my friends, I try to, in very few minutes, sum up a little bit of what I feel are the core principles and pillars of Heschel's life and of his thinking and of what we would find in his works. Allow me to pause here and open for a dialogue that will bring us to other aspects of Heschel. Ursula.
Ernesto, thank you very much for the broad and enthusiastic picture which you have painted for describing the life, describing the background, describing his contribution, and describing his enduring contribution. I just have some small spotlights. My first encounter with Heschel goes back to the year 1984. I was studying in Jerusalem, and there I met a student, a rabbinical school student from JTS, and we began a dialogue. And as a gift of, as a token of our friendship, he gave me the book God in Search of Man. So that was my first encounter with Heschel. And then I got curious to learn more about Judaism, conservative Judaism. That brought me to JTS, where I met Fritz Rothschild, philosopher, student of Abraham Joshua Heschel, and he was the advisor of my doctoral dissertation. So my life also and my thinking, Heschel has had a major influence on that. And ever since when I've been teaching Judaism, I've been using texts and thoughts from Heschel. I loved what you said about, from Abraham to Abraham, there is no one like Abraham. I love that. And we know the biblical verse, you are a blessing. And that, I think, this biblical verse which God speaks to Abraham, we can also say about Abraham Joshua Heschel. He was and he is a continuous blessing. Furthermore, you pointed out how he is a role model, and that's, I think, really very, very special. In his writing, his teaching, living a spiritual life and acting, all this really is inextricably bound together. One aspect couldn't be thought and couldn't be seen without the other. I always feel like quoting Heschel, because he said he put things so well. And that is also what I'm doing when I'll throw a spotlight on Heschel and interreligious relations. I think what's characteristic of Heschel, one aspect is he tried to share his tradition with others who were unlike him. So it was important to him to share the aspects of observance of mitzvot who were not observant, and to share the Jewish heritage, for instance, with Christians. He was a consultor for the Second Vatican Council, very important, and he was the first Jewish professor to teach at Union Theological Seminary. His inaugural lecture, No Religion is an Island, which he gave in 1965, I think, when people ask me, if I could recommend one text, if they just want to read one text, then I always say, well, read the text, No Religion is an Island. And the title is taken, or basically, from a poem by John Donne, No Man is an Island. So he says, no religion is an island. And I want to simply share 4 quotes from this text, and if you haven't already read it, I can only encourage you read it, of course, in English or in German. He speaks about Jewish Christian relations, and he opens it up also for Jewish-Muslim dialogue. I'm just referring right now to Jewish-Christian relations. He says, "We are heirs to a long history of mutual contempt among religions and religious denominations, of religious coercion, strife, and persecution. Even in periods of peace, the relationship that obtains between representatives of different religion is not reciprocity of ignorance. It is an abyss, a source of detraction and distrust, casting suspicion and undoing efforts of many an honest and noble expression of goodwill." So Heschel really was aware of the problems, the deep abyss, and yet, despite the history, the theology of contempt Christians taught for millennia, he was the person who really tried to, or he stretched out a hand. And he asks, what divides us? What unites us? We disagree in law and creed, in commitments which lie at the very heart of our religious existence. We say no to one another in some doctrines essential and sacred to us. What unites us? Our being accountable to God, our being objectives of God's concern, precious in His eyes. Our conceptions of what ails us may be different, but the anxiety is the same. The language, the imagination, the concretization of our hopes are different, but the embarrassment is the same, and so is the sigh, the sorrow, and the necessity to obey. And then he reaches out, and what I love, looking for something that we can share, and he says, holiness is not the monopoly of any particular religion or tradition. Wherever a deed is done in accord with the will of God, wherever a thought of man is directed toward Him, there's the holy. And there he really, that's the universalist aspect of him. And in the end he asks, what then is the purpose of interreligious cooperation? It is neither to flatter nor to refute one another, but to help one another, to share insight and learning, to cooperate in academic ventures on the highest scholarly level, and what is even more important, to search in the wilderness for wellsprings of devotion, for treasures of stillness, for the power of love and care of man. What is urgently needed are ways of helping one another in the terrible predicament of here and now by the courage to believe that the word of the Lord endures forever, as well as here and now. To cooperate in trying to bring about a resurrection of sensitivity, a revival of conscience, to keep alive the divine sparks in our souls, to nurture openness to the spirit of the Psalms, reverence for the words of the prophets, and faithfulness to the living of God. And each time I read it, I can only say, Amen, Amen. And I think that what he described and his words, and of course, much more and many more could and should be quoted, still rings true, and all the more true for today. That's something on interreligious relations. I do not want to stop there. I have, over the past days, read Sam Dresner's tiny but very insightful book on Heschel, Hasidism, and Halacha. And Sam Dresner, I still remember him, I'm sure as a number of you do too. He was a student of Heschel, and he was very close to him, and he also was, he spoke much to him, and also in 1972, when Heschel became, he had suffered a near fatal heart attack, and afterwards he still spoke to him. And he spoke with Heschel about his life, and he asked Dresner, Sam Dresner asked Heschel what he wanted from God. And I think that's a wonderful question also to ask, what is it that each of us, what is our one wish, from God or from life? And Heschel said, I did not ask for success, I asked for wonder. And you, referring to God, gave it to me. And he also, there's a Yiddish saying, ich hab gebeten Wunder anstatt Glück, and du hast sie mir gegeben. So, wonder. You spoke about it, Ernesto, about the miracle, again and again, the radical amazement. And then there is something else about personal life. Some lines. And Dresner is quoting Heschel, how not to despair, how to lead our lives. And Heschel says, remember that there is meaning beyond absurdity. Know that every deed counts, that every word is power. Above all, remember that you must build your life as if it were a work of art. What a thought. We are the craft people of our lives. We are the ones to create, and I really like to think, of course, responsibility is important, but also to look at our own life as a piece of art. And one final aspect of what Heschel says about how to live, and it rings very true. He said, living is not a private affair of the individual. Living is what man does with God's time, what man does with God's world. Life is a mandate, not the enjoyment of an annuity, a task, not a game, a command, not a favor. And there again, I can only say, these are words of admonishment which speak to me very deeply, and I can only say, Amen. And now I give it, Debbie, now it's your turn again.
Amen.
Thank you both so much. But before we start asking our questions and giving our reflections, I wondered if Rabbi Yattah, if you would want to respond to anything that Ursula just said.
Yes, of course. I feel that Heschel really left us a treasure of so many works that reading his works is the only path for us to truly appreciate the enormous significance of Heschel for our lives. What he can give us is something that is indescribable. If one thing I tell always when I speak about Heschel is read Heschel. Read him. Go to the text. I cannot transmit the feeling that one gets when one is reading the books of Heschel. And what I love about what Ursula did is he brought his words to us. She read to us from Heschel. And being in contact with his writing is a spiritual experience. It's not just an intellectual experience. His works are spiritual diaries. And when we read him, we feel that we are holding his hand and he's walking us through his experiences, his visions, his realizations, what he discovers in life as significant, he puts it into words so beautiful that he allows us to feel what he felt when he had these insights. So this is a gift that is for all times. He will be read and understood and enjoyed and thanked, by so many people that can read him. This is the first thing I want to point out of what Ursula shared with us. Heschel, there is a question by Marilyn. What do you recommend as the first book to read of Heschel? That's a question that always comes up. There is a book of essays that Heschel wrote, which is entitled The Insecurity of Freedom. And reading short essays is, I think, a great way to begin reading Heschel. Not to read Man is Not Alone and God in Search of Man, which are the magnum opus of Heschel, philosophically speaking. The essays in The Insecurity of Freedom is my way of beginning. There is another work that is very moving, very simple to read, very beautiful, which is The Earth is the Lord's, which is the book that he wrote based on a lecture that he gave, a presentation that he gave at the EVO in 1946 in New York about the old world of the Hasidic world of Eastern Europe that was destroyed in Second World War. That was his testimony to that world. And it's a beautiful book to begin reading Heschel. And the other book that many people used for beginning Heschel is The Sabbath, okay? So those are three different points of departure in reading Heschel.
Thank you. That was actually going to be my question also. Phil is going to tell us what we have in our library. Go ahead, Phil, please unmute.
We have almost every book he's published somewhere in the library. So
thank you. For those of you who don't know Phil, he's our synagogue librarian, among many other things, also a master teacher. And he was one of the ones from our whole gathering. Was it 4 years ago, Ursula? When we had our first connection with Ursula's community from Germany that came to us. We wanted to do reciprocity, and it was Phil and Judy who went. So Phil is our great connector.
And Phil is also the chair of our Scholarly Education Committee, and that committee is co-sponsoring this program.
Right. So good. So Cliff is showing another one of those. So I wonder, Ursula, if you would have different recommendations as to the first three books that we should encounter for Heschel.
I think if someone would start, is a beginner and has never read Heschel before, then I think I would recommend The Sabbath, and I would also recommend God in Search of Man. And I think what one can do with Heschel, one can pick up a book by Heschel and start somewhere, read a few pages and stop. Because his language and his thoughts it's evocative. So it evokes thoughts, it evokes feelings. Therefore, one can, open a book and will find something. And yes, those are the ones I would recommend. But of course, I just saw, A Passion of Truth, of course, on the Kotzka and Kierkegaard, of course, someone who's interested in Jewish-Christian relation, that's the book to be recommended. And of course, his text, No Religion is an Island, which I think should be mandatory for every student of theology. And yes, I think it's also worth for reading for rabbinical school students. And of course, students of pedagogy, future teachers. I think all future teachers, regardless of religion or denomination, should read No Religion is an Island. So perhaps, yes, Those
Thank
are
you.
my recommendations.
I would like to commend to those of you who have not been following the chat some of the things that Anne Lurie Berg has been posting about the impact of his book, The Sabbath, on her own life. Let me ask a different kind of a question. A number of years ago, I heard one of the late professors at JTS, whom Ursula and Rabbi Yattah knew, Neil Gilman, who used to say, don't try to read Heschel linearly. It doesn't work. You have to look at it as poetry. And I wonder if Rabbi Yattah and you, Dr. Rudnick, could talk to us more about how to read these books.
Yes. You know, I studied with Neil Gilman. I recall several phrases that he said about Heschel. You know, I coincide like the one you shared just now. Heschel cannot be read like any other book. That's why I said these are spiritual diaries, and they are so intense. They have such insight in every phrase, in every paragraph. I say a stop is a stop in Heschel. A comma is a comma. You cannot continue reading on. You can read only one bit at a time. To read 1 page, 2 pages of Heschel is very intense. And one reads and puts the book down and enjoys the experience of the insight that he opened to you. By the way, I go constantly back to Heschel's books because I may have read 10 times the same essay. And every time I read it, I feel as if I didn't understand it before, that now I am understanding it. So it's a spiritual experience. It's a reading Heschel is not like reading any book. Reading Heschel is like meditation. It's a repository where we go to deepen our souls. It's that impact that his poetic prose gives us as a gift. It's a transformative experience. The whole life is taken up. It's as if we are at the feet of the master. And what is important to understand in Heschel is that he was a Hasidic Rebbe, okay? Hasidism is a tradition where the personal encounter between the tzaddik or the Rebbe and the Hasidim, this personal encounter is transformative in life, and it becomes the most important thing for the Hasid, to do what the Rebbe wants him to do what the tzaddik wants him to do, okay? So in Hasidism, a Rebbe moved from one town to another, all the Hasidim were moved with him. Now, in my case, I was privileged to be a disciple of Marshall Meyer, who was a disciple of Heschel. So this transmission of a spiritual discipleship is what is unique about Heschel. That's why I think Heschel is not like any other thinker. He is an institution all in himself. And we all go back to try to find the stories of the Rebbe. When you shared with us, Debbie, your experience, you know, that becomes a maaseh, like a story that is told about the Rebbe. And that's how Hasidism operates. We are all interested, who love Heschel, in hearing any and every story we can gather from people that knew him personally. If you met him only for 10 minutes, but had an experience, which is what I had with Marshall, you know, that becomes a part of the sacred story of our master. And I think it's a way of involving ourselves emotionally and spiritually with the Jewish tradition. So his works are unique in that regard. It's a unique way of reading a master.
Okay, you are muted, Debbie.
Debbie.
That's probably a good idea. Ursula, do you have anything you'd like to add on that point?
Yes, I think Heschel's text can be read on many levels. They can speak to people who have yet had no encounter or no knowledge, who know little about Judaism, and still they would really get out of it. They learn something. Their hearts would be touched. And yet, also because Heschel quotes so much biblical tradition, prophets, rabbinic literature, and also further on, those who know more, I think, will see much more. So Heschel can be read on different levels. I'm now tempted, or yes, I want to be a little bit provocative. Ernesto, you just said, Heschel is also kind of, Heschel is a rebbe, and we are after stories, and, our rebbe. Yes, however, there's a little something in me where I feel like, well, shouldn't we be adults? And adults in a way where we have also a critical appreciation and not, an uncritical adoration. So, I think, yeah, he was such a great man, we can also look at him as a human being with his, little mistakes like every person has. So, and it's important not to, he was already so great, it's important to also look at him in a way with, with a critical reflection, and perhaps we should, do that another time to really look at other thinkers and ask, look at Levinas or look at Schneerson, and ask, look for similarities, look for differences. That I think would be for another time.
And I have the job to end this meeting with mixed feelings, because a number of us, probably most of us, would like this to go on for another couple of hours at least, despite the sun shining outside, because this was enlightening in many ways. The positive part is we are going to be continuing the dialogue of connection, and we will be also thinking of ways to use Heschel more in our everyday lives and in our teaching. I want to tell you what you can expect, what's on the program, at least tentatively on paper, over the next year with Begungan, and that is Sacred Therapy, Jewish Perspectives on Healing of the Soul and the World. And that will be a mind spiritual approach done by Ursula and myself, and I may be able to get somebody else with a lot of knowledge in the area. We're going to do something on social justice, conversations, theology, and action in March, and grace. What it means and its limits. Christians talk a lot about grace. As Jews, we only hear about it occasionally, and would be nice if we understood it better. Ursula is very likely going to visit us in person in New Jersey at Congregation Agudath and wherever else she may choose to visit in April. We're working on ways to ensure that this is possible, and so we're going to start early to publicize it and make sure that this happens so that we have more than 1 hour. And we'll have guests, and we'll develop the program. Thank you all for coming. Thanks again, Ursula, Rabbi Yattah, and Debbie, and those of you who came here, Diane and Marilyn, for the welcoming translation. And let's all get together again in peace.